Well, hello, everybody. I am so excited to welcome you all to LinkedIn Live today. And with me, my guest is Josh Elion from ProcureAbilit. Now, Josh, I'm going to tell people a little about you, and then I want to jump into our conversation. We're going to be talking about integrative negotiations. But Josh has had about a decade in various procurement and sourcing leadership roles, both within small business and corporate environments. He has hands-on experience leading cross-functional teams to solve supply disruptions, improve costs, negotiate complex multi-year agreements, and streamline processes at both the business unit and the group level. Josh has also helped businesses develop and implement organizational design changes in both tactical and strategic organizations. So he has experience working in global supply chains in a variety of industries, including aerospace, defense, music, and utilities. That's a nice broad range for both direct materials and services procurement. And he received his MBA from Pepperdine. So Josh, welcome to the studio today.
Thanks for having me, Don.
I'm so excited. So we're going to talk about integrative negotiations, but can you start off with giving a definition? What is it and why is it important in the modern inflationary times?
Yeah, so when you first start studying negotiation, they tell you that everything is a negotiation, right? Whether you're buying a house, buying parts, or even figuring out where to go for lunch. So I think specifically understanding the study of negotiation has pretty broad application to all of us within our lives, right? But I think since COVID, we've probably all, especially within the supply chain industry, felt the perfect storm of supply constraints and inflationary pressures, right? And I think we've probably all come to understand the consistent bottom-up cost pressures through the value chain. And those kind of conversations have really started to shift power dynamics towards the supplier. Straining long-term relationships, businesses that have been working together for years, right? All this stuff is happening at the same time. Organizations are going out of business. Things are just getting harder to acquire across commodities. And what I have seen personally across a lot of these conversations is negotiators on both sides of the argument digging their heels in, right? Maybe even using a long-term relationship as leverage and bullying counterparties. But that, frankly, from my perspective, is a mistake, right? There's so much value that is lost between the parties when that kind of thing happens. So I think the question itself is like, how do you get best value without compromising supply chain integrity? And I think integrative negotiation is specifically well suited for that kind of thing, right? Integrative negotiation is a style that focuses on collaboration. It focuses on addressing needs and issues of both parties. It asks the group to work together to develop a solution, right, that's going to net more value as a whole for the group. And I think a lot of times people refer to it as win-win negotiating.
Okay. So then when you talk about that, how does that really differ from other negotiation styles?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's easier to understand what something is when you know what it isn't, right? So other styles, I think, look at negotiations more as a zero-sum game over like a fixed value, for example. You look at competitive negotiation where a negotiator is seeking to maximize their gains regardless of the cost to the counterparty. And then you can think about like positional negotiation, maybe think of haggling over a position. Home buying is a great example of this. I'll submit an offer to you to buy your house for $100,000. You say, no, I want it for $150,000. We're not talking about the underlying causes. And I think that right there is the differentiator in integrative negotiation. Within it, the value's not fixed, right? In fact, the underlying needs of the counterparties are being considered and utilized to derive more value as a whole. And I guess to be clear, like you're still establishing a bargaining range. You might even use positions within your negotiation. You'll have resistance points, opening positions, but you're not exclusively focused on the position, right? You're asking why. Again, focusing on those underlying needs to try and address them.
Got it. So when you talk about this for procurement professionals, why is it important for us to understand integrative negotiations then?
Yeah. So the principles of integrative negotiation align quite well with the fundamentals of what we do in sourcing. And I think as buyers coming up the ranks for many years, we're taught best quality, best price on time, right? But I think that's a pretty simple view of the world, right? It forgets about the myriad of additional metrics that you have to work on every single day. It ignores the importance of the relationship. And frankly, if you think about it, right, the relationship between these businesses that we work for will often outlive our tenure as negotiators. So there's repercussions to alienating a counterparty within a negotiation, right? You'll strain day-to-day operations. People will be less inclined to support you on emergent needs. But the opposite is true as well, right? Like a positive negotiation that fosters collaboration, it will do the opposite. It's in integrative negotiation specifically is inherently solution oriented. You're working to maximize gains collectively, and the byproduct is just improved relations. I think it gives, at least for me, right, like in my experience, gives me the highest possibility that everybody's going to walk away from the deal happy. Which I think that also means that the best deal is not necessarily the one with the lowest price, right? It might be the one that on one issue or another, everybody leaves something on the table.
Okay. So, I mean, I get it. You want to be the customer of choice. When you have supply chain disruptions, you want your supplier to want to come to you and supply you first. So what kind of concepts from integrative negotiations do you utilize in your work?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess I want to point out first, right, that a lot of this stuff is common sense, and a lot of people will probably be doing it already in their existing negotiations. But I think the power here is in understanding and knowing, right? So for me, it informs my preparation for a negotiation, and then more importantly, establishes like an architecture for the way that I think about a negotiation and behave in it as well, right? And I think that's probably more powerful because in a negotiation, it's going to be dynamic. And in integrative negotiation is asking you to ask those questions, ask why, understand those root causes. So there's going to be a lot of things you can't plan for. So when that plan falls to pieces, partway through the negotiation, it's important to have that architecture to think through. So, okay, that said, right, there's like 4 concepts that stuck with me through my studies and I found pretty applicable in my everyday negotiations. And those 4 are BATNA, framing, expanding the pie, and log rolling. And just to kind of step through them, right? Yeah. BATNA is an acronym. It stands for Best Alternative to Negotiated Agreement, right? That really sets up leverage, right? It helps understand the bargaining range. And it's important for me not only to understand my best alternative, but also my counterparties, because then I can start evaluating open offers, right? Are we at the end of the bargaining range? Can I push on this anymore? So those are the kind of questions that BATNA helps to answer. It's really like a foundation for the negotiation. Framing is a bit more abstract. Think of like the glass half full versus glass half empty example. The concept here is that the way in which I phrase or present my offer to you will change the way that you think about it. And I'm going to like really simple example, right? Yeah. If you want a 10% price increase, I can offer you 5% more than you're currently making or 5% less than you asked for example, right? So that's kind of, I think, how it's taught. I like to think about framing more broadly, though, albeit esoteric, right? But I like to think about framing from the perspective of like a worldview specific to the negotiation. So the way that I view the negotiation, the way that I perceive the negotiation, if I can get you to align to it, I have more control over the direction of where the negotiation is going to take. So I'm constantly reinforcing that frame with context, my why, my reasoning, just to try and make sure that I can dictate where we go. And that's not to say that my intent is ever to like be disingenuous with wanting to gain. I'm trying to maximize values all the time for my organization, but I'm also trying to establish a strong value for the partnership, right? And that's genuine all the time, right? that next concept, expanding the pie, is a pretty core principle to integrative negotiation.
Mhm.
And that's just the process of kind of connecting disparate things. So, I mentioned needs and issues focus. So this is where that comes into play, right? What other needs and issues can we address to kind of help add more value, right? And if you've done a good job of prioritizing you and your stakeholders' needs, and you've figured out what their needs and issues are, sometimes you can bring things to the table that are going to add value to the vendor or whomever you're negotiating with that weren't originally on a table. And then the final concept is log rolling, which I think is sort of the end of all of this, which is just a funny way of saying trading across issues. So this is how deals start to come to a close, right? You've downloaded all your needs, downloaded all your issues. You've put out your positions, you understand where you are, and you start trading. Okay, well, this is good for you. I care about this. You don't care about that. Let's take that.
Oh, all right. All right.
Yeah.
I get it. But you also said that it's okay to leave a little bit of value on the table, that you're not necessarily getting the very best price. But what if this is a buyer who's only authorized to negotiate price? What do they do?
Yeah. So price is interesting, right? Because price is not just that superficial number that you get delivered on a piece of paper. It's made up of a bunch of components and cost drivers, right?
Right.
And if you can break that apart, it gives you levers to start working on. Those negotiations are typically a little different, right? Because you're looking for efficiencies within cost components. But once, if you can make it clear to a counterparty that profit is not the target, right? Once you get through that sort of uncomfortable phase of sharing information that's sort of not typically shared, you can make the supply chain more efficient as a whole, right? Potentially increasing their margins, reducing their costs, and you're getting a pass through yourself. So that's, the definition of a win-win.
Yeah. So is that like sharing my process maps, sharing internal information so maybe they can impact something that we're not even talking about right now?
Yeah, sure. You're back in aerospace, we'd have customer right to buy contracts, and we've done this thing where we've seen that material, we've gotten full cost breakdowns with vendors, and we said, oh, hey, I can get you titanium for cheaper if you just use my right to buy contract. So it's those kind of things. And in my past experience, we've connected with engineers within our organization to try and, I guess, improve outputs, right? Improve efficiency in specific processes. And yeah, a lot of good conversations start happening when you start talking about, hey, well, why is that tolerance too tight, as an example, right? So,
yeah. And one of my favorite things was working with a team who said, I want 100% on-time delivery. And you'd say to them, what does 95% on-time delivery cost you? And they look at you like, I don't know. But why is it always 95 to 100% on time? And they don't even know what it costs them. Maybe 80% is good because you've got 2 years worth of inventory.
Yeah.
That's the type of probing conversations I think that are just so interesting. And I don't think the stakeholders, I think they see it as, I want 100% because that's a perfect score and that's what I want, or I want 99%, not realizing they could give up a lot of margin that's going to cost them. So, for example, I had someone who was demanding desktop computers back when everyone was working on site to be delivered within 24 hours. And yet it took IT close to 3 weeks to come out and get them up on the system. So somewhere in the company, somebody must have said, I need a computer and it's not here. So we're going to put in 24-hour delivery, which meant the suppliers keeping a stock of desktop computers. That's huge. Right. And then it got there and I'm paying a premium to get it there in 24 hours. And then I wasn't even able to use it. Those are the type of things that I think are incredible when you start, re-engineering the processes and all the other, I guess you called it log rolling, but when you really look, or expanding the pie, when you look outside the simple scenario, which is I want 24-hour delivery, into the bigger supply chain issues.
Yeah, it's always about asking why, right? And digging into that root cause. I think that's super critical. And that's where you resolve impasses, right? That's where you can gain more value against vendors who have huge leverage over you, is just digging in, asking why, focusing on needs, focusing on issues.
I love doing fishbone diagrams, so I love the asking why.
Yeah.
So, all right, what if you're in a scenario where you can't come to an agreement on a particular issue? What do you do then?
Yeah. So impasses, like I just mentioned, they're common in every negotiation, right? And again, the answer is to just get to the bottom of it, right? Be relentless with asking why. I'm actually working on a contract right now where it feels like we hit impasses on every clause, right? Where my counterparty will just delete a clause in its entirety, and it's my job as the negotiator on my end to just understand that, because if we talk about that clause specifically as a whole, right, like we'll never get to the bottom of it because we don't agree on the clause. But once I start asking why and we break down, we find out that they're actually okay with the intent behind the clause, but there's a specific thing that the intent is too broad and it captures, right? And so now we can carve that out. We find more things to agree on, and now that clause is sitting in the contract. It's not redlined at all. It's just got a couple extra carve outs at the end. So I think you'll always find an impasse, but integrative negotiation asks you to ask why, and it asks you to understand and think and actively listen. And I think that that's kind of how you get through those impasses.
Yeah. So, all right. So what about typically with a large company, you've got some leverage over your supplier, but what if it's a supplier that has significant leverage over you? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's probably one of the most challenging things that we'll face as procurement people. The reality is that there's no easy answer, right? But I think everybody has probably felt that situation, being in that sole source position at some point or another. I think it's important to note that you may not win on the core ask, right? Like if a vendor's asking for a substantial price increase, it's a profit grab, you know it. What can you do about it when they're the only guy in the world who can make it, for example, right? Integrative negotiation gives you some tools to deal with that, right? Because you're going and you're downloading all of these needs and all of the concerns of your own stakeholders, maybe there's other things that you can win on that they don't care about as much, right? I've been in negotiations where we lost on price, right? We of course minimized the impact as much as we could, but we won on consignment. We won on liquidated damages for on-time delivery. We won on limitation to liability. So, it's, again, we're expanding the pie. We're adding value. We're connecting things that we weren't talking about before. And again, it's not perfect, but that's how you get around it. That's how you generate more value, even when you're being pushed up against the wall.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you wanted to share some best practices when negotiating, what would you say?
Yeah, it's mostly behavior things. Prepare, right? Always learn the players. I think it's that conversation about focusing on needs, issues, and priorities. It's not specific to you, right? Go and download the needs, issues, and prioritize those things of your own stakeholders, but also get deep into what the counterparty wants. And in your preparation, try and figure it out. Talk to people. What have you been hearing? Are there invoices being held? What's going on, right?
Right.
And that sort of leads into actively listening, right? You're trying to get a better read on the person across from you. You're trying to get a better understanding of what's in between the lines. Be creative with your solutions. Don't be afraid to throw things out there that are maybe not typical or usual, right? They call it out of the box thinking, but it's really just being brave with your ideas. And then I think like the last thing that I'd say is just don't be afraid to stop and think about it, right? Like there's plenty of times, and especially in integrative negotiation, you're digging up all this stuff as you go. You're not going to think of everything. I get caught off guard all the time, and it's okay to stop and think and say, hey, I gotta back away. I don't know the answer. Or just even in the meeting, use space. You don't have to fill it with noise. Use the space to think about what they've just asked.
The active listening, I think, is so important because I think so often when we're talking with someone, we're actually rehearsing what we're going to say next rather than really listening to what they have to say. And then I would have thought taking a pause like that to think would have weakened you. But if it gives you the time to come back with something that is going to help the conversation, I guess it doesn't weaken you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think when you're sitting in a room with a bunch of seasoned negotiators, sometimes there's a lot of space where people are not talking, right? And I think I think that that's totally okay, right? You don't have to have the answer to every question at your fingertips.
Oh, I think that's great. Don't shoot from the hip then. So do
Yeah,
you have any final thoughts for our listeners that you'd like to share about integrative negotiations?
sure. Yeah, I think just to reiterate all of the stuff, right? Like at the end of the day, negotiations are about people and relationships and communication. And the way you present yourself and the way you present your offers and your counter arguments will change the way that people perceive them. I think to that end, it's important to genuinely collaborate, right? Like just change your frame of work or your frame of mind if you're not going into it feeling particularly collaborative, right? Focus on those needs and issues. Drill into root causes. Be curious, and always look for opportunities to create value. I think if you do those things, you're going to always find more success in your negotiations. And to that end, like as a final thought, in integrative negotiation, success is in part, at least, when both parties can walk away feeling good about a deal.
Yeah, that's the best kind of negotiations there are. So we're going to wrap up, but folks, if you want to hear more from ProcureAbilit and participate in their roundtable on October 17th, and I believe that's Tuesday at 10:35 a.m., they have a roundtable, which is maximizing indirect procurement's value, delivering operational excellence and strategic engagements. So I hope, folks, that for all of you that are coming to the summit next week in Scottsdale, Arizona, that you will tune into this roundtable. It's going to be an excellent conversation. I will say you guys are great at keeping the conversation among everybody going, and you guys do an excellent roundtable, Josh.
Thank you.
Yeah, always get high scores for your roundtables. So, folks, this is Josh Elion from ProcureAbilit. And like I said, they're going to be at next week's summit in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I hope you stop by for their roundtable on October 17th at 10:35. And Josh, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you, Don. It was a pleasure.
A pleasure talking to you. That was a great conversation. I enjoyed it.